The town of Red Cedar Junction rested quietly against the wide Montana plains, a place where life moved slowly and every face told a story. On the morning of the harvest gathering in September 1883, Elise Carroll stood alone in her small kitchen, staring at the corset lying across her table. It looked less like clothing and more like a cage. 12 stiff bones pressed through the fabric, promising shape and control, but at the cost of comfort and breath. She had worn it every day for nearly 3 years, ever since the birth of her daughter, ever since the day her husband walked out the door and never came back. Elise picked up the corset and ran her fingers over the tight laces. The midwife had warned her after Maggie was born. "Some women recover quickly," she had said gently. "Others need time." That time was the one thing Elise had not been given. Just 6 weeks after the birth, Henry had looked at her with disappointment in his eyes, and 3 months later, he was gone, leaving only a short note and an empty space in her life. She had not cried. Tears required strength she did not have to spare. On the floor nearby, her 4-year-old daughter Maggie played quietly with a wooden horse missing one leg. The child's brown eyes were thoughtful, far too serious for someone so young. "Mama, are you going to the big supper tonight?" Maggie asked softly. "I am, sweetheart," Elise replied, kneeling beside her and brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Mrs. Whitehead asked me to help serve. Will there be cake?" "There might be," Elise said with a faint smile. "Can I come?" Elise hesitated, then shook her head gently. "Not this time. You'll stay with Mrs. Dudley. She'll give you supper and tuck you into bed." Maggie nodded, accepting the answer without complaint. She had learned early not to ask for more than she was given. Elise stood and laced the corset tightly around her waist, wincing as it pressed into her ribs. It was uncomfortable, even painful, but it allowed her to walk through town without whispers following behind her. When she finished dressing in her plain brown gown, she glanced at her reflection in the small mirror. She looked ordinary, quiet, and safe. Exactly the way she needed to be. That evening, Miller's Hall buzzed with life. Lanterns glowed warmly from the rafters, and the smell of chicken soup and fresh bread filled the air. The harvest gathering was an annual tradition, and a celebration meant to bring the community together before the harsh Montana winter settled in. Elise worked behind the serving table, ladling soup into bowls and handing out bread with steady hands. She moved with quiet efficiency, never drawing attention to herself, just as she preferred. Around her, laughter and music filled the hall, but she remained focused on her work. When Mrs. Whitehead approached, she gave Elise an approving nod. "You've done well, dear. Now go change into your service dress before the guests arrive." Elise slipped away from the busy hall and walked down the narrow hallway toward the back rooms. The small space provided for changing was little more than a corner behind a folding screen and a thin wooden door that barely closed. She stepped inside and worked quickly, as she always did. She removed her dress and began loosening the laces of her corset. With each pull, her body relaxed, her lungs filling with air more freely. The relief was overwhelming. For a brief moment, she stood there in silence, breathing deeply, grateful for the simple freedom of movement. She did not hear the footsteps approaching. Kellen Robles had been in Red Cedar Junction for 8 months, working for the Conley Ranch. At 31, he was tall and broad-shouldered, known for his quiet nature and steady hands. That afternoon, he had been sent to retrieve extra serving spoons from the storage area behind Miller's Hall. Counting the doors along the hallway, he stopped at what he believed was the supply room. Without thinking, he turned the handle and stepped inside. Then he froze. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the woman standing before him. Her back was partially turned, her corset hanging loose in her hand. She stood in her shift, her figure soft and marked by motherhood, vulnerable yet strong, in a way that stirred something deep within him. Kellen's breath caught in his throat. He did not look away immediately, not out of disrespect, but because what he saw was not indecent. It was human, honest, real. In that instant, he saw more than a woman undressing. He saw courage. He saw the quiet strength of someone who carried burdens alone and still rose each day to face the world. Then her eyes met his. Her face turned pale, and her hands moved quickly to cover herself, clutching the corset to her chest. Shame flushed her cheeks, raw and immediate. Kellen spun around at once, his heart pounding. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he stammered, stepping backward toward the door. "I thought this was the storage room." He pulled the door shut and stood in the hallway, breathing hard, his pulse racing. The image of her remained vivid in his mind, not as something improper, but as something deeply moving. He had seen her before, he realized. She was the woman serving food in the hall earlier, the one who moved quietly, as if trying to disappear. Now he understood. She wasn't trying to disappear. She was simply trying to survive. As the evening progressed, Kellen found himself searching the crowded hall for her. When he finally spotted her behind the serving table, calmly ladling soup as if nothing had happened, he felt a strange mix of admiration and guilt. Gathering his courage, he approached her quietly. "Evening, ma'am," he said softly. She glanced up, recognition flickering in her eyes before she looked back down at her work. "I'd like to apologize again," he continued. "I didn't mean any disrespect." Her hand paused mid-motion. After a moment, she looked up at him, her expression guarded but steady. "It was an accident," she said quietly. "You don't need to apologize." "I do," he replied gently. "I walked into a space you believed was private. I want you to know I meant no harm." For a long moment, she studied him. Then she nodded. "Thank you." Kellen felt a sense of relief wash over him. As he turned to leave, he hesitated before speaking again, his voice low. "For what it's worth," he said, "a man would have to be blind not to look, but a gentleman knows when to step away." Her eyes widened slightly, surprise replacing embarrassment. A faint smile touched her lips, small but genuine. "That's quite a thing to say, mister," she replied softly. "Kellen Robles," he said, tipping his hat. "At your service." "Elise Carroll," she answered. As he stepped away, Kellen felt something shift within him, something unexpected and undeniable. And for the first time in years, Elise Carroll felt truly seen, not with judgment, but with respect. Neither of them knew it yet, but that brief, accidental moment had opened a door neither of them would ever close. The music swelled through Miller's Hall as couples moved across the wooden floor, their laughter echoing beneath the lantern-lit rafters. Elise Carroll remained behind the serving table, her hands steady as she ladled the last of the chicken soup into waiting bowls, yet her thoughts were far from the crowd. Now they lingered in the quiet hallway, replaying the moment she had been seen at her most vulnerable. She had expected shame to follow her all evening, but something about Kellen Robles' words lingered instead. There had been no mockery in his eyes, no pity, only quiet respect. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Later, when the rush of guests faded and the musicians struck up a lively fiddle tune, Elise slipped away to the back of the hall. She sat on a narrow wooden bench, rubbing her tired feet through her worn boots. The evening air drifted through the open doors, cool and refreshing after hours near the stove. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up to see Kellen standing nearby, his hat in his hands. Lantern light cast warm shadows across his broad shoulders and calm, steady face. "You're persistent, Mr. Robles," she replied, at a hint of amusement in her voice. "Is that a no?" Elise sighed softly and gestured to the empty space beside her. "It's a bench. I don't own it." Kellen sat down, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a moment, neither spoke. The music filled the silence, and the rhythmic sound of boots against the floor drifted toward them. "You've been on your feet all evening," he said quietly. "That's what happens when you volunteer to serve," she replied. "You could have said no." Elise let out a short, tired laugh. "No, I couldn't." Kellen did not press further. He simply nodded, accepting her answer. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice softer. "Why did you come over here? Really?" "To talk," he said simply. "Most men don't talk to me unless they want something." "I'm not most men," he replied gently. She studied him, a skepticism flickering in her eyes. Yet there was no arrogance in his tone, only honesty. Slowly, her guarded expression softened. "No," she admitted quietly. "I suppose you're not." From that night forward, Kellen found reasons to visit Red Cedar Junction more often than his duties required. He told himself it was for supplies or errands, but the truth was simpler. He wanted to see Elise Carroll again. 2 weeks later, he found her at the general store, standing at the counter with her young daughter beside her. Maggie clutched a small cloth doll, its uneven stitches giving it a kind of charm. Elise was negotiating with the shopkeeper over the price of flour. "It's gone up 20 cents, the shopkeeper said apologetically. "I understand," Elise replied calmly. But I only need 5 pounds." Kellen stepped forward before the man could measure the smaller amount. "Put it on my account," he said quietly. 5 pounds, just as she asked. Both Elise and the shopkeeper turned toward him in surprise. "Mr. Robles," Elise began carefully. "I don't need—" "I know you don't," he interrupted gently. "But I'd like to help." Her jaw tightened. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity," he said. "It's neighborly." She hesitated, glancing down at Maggie, who watched the exchange with wide, curious eyes. After a long moment, Elise sighed. "Fine, but I will pay you back." Kellen nodded, satisfied. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Outside the store, he handed her the wrapped parcel. Maggie skipped ahead along the wooden sidewalk, humming to herself as she played with her doll. "What, you didn't have to do that," Elise said quietly. "I wanted to," he replied. "Why?" Kellen met her eyes steadily. "Because you deserve someone making life easier for you, not harder." Her expression shifted, something between suspicion and gratitude flickering across her face. She looked away, unsure how to respond. Their conversations grew slowly, unfolding in quiet moments over the following weeks. Kellen walked her home from church one Sunday, listening as she spoke about Maggie with quiet pride. "She's too serious for her age," Elise admitted. "Children learn from what they see," Kellen said thoughtfully. "What does she see when she looks at me?" Elise asked. He considered the question carefully. "She sees someone strong." Elise did not answer, but her eyes softened. On another afternoon, Kellen brought vegetables from the ranch, carrots, onions, and potatoes. Elise invited him inside reluctantly, and they sat at her small table sharing coffee. It was there she spoke of her husband for the first time. "He left 3 months after Maggie was born," she said quietly. "He said he couldn't stay with a woman who had let herself go." Kellen's jaw tightened. "That's a coward's excuse." "Maybe," she replied. "But it was his excuse." "Did you love him?" he asked gently. Elise thought for a moment. I think I loved the idea of not being alone. You're not alone now, Kellen said softly. She smiled, a genuine smile that lit her face. No, I suppose I'm not. As autumn faded into winter, their bond deepened. Kellen taught Elise small things, how to stand tall, how to breathe deeply, how to stop apologizing for taking up space. So one afternoon, he brought her a bundle of soft cloth strips. These will help more than the corset, he explained. They'll support you without hurting you. Elise flushed, embarrassed, but touched. You've been thinking about my corset? I've been thinking about your comfort, he corrected gently. She studied the cloth in her hands, then looked up at him. You're a strange man, Kellen Robles. Is that a no? She shook her head, her voice soft. No, it's a yes. Over the following weeks, Elise replaced her corset with the cloth wraps. The difference was immediate. She breathed easier, moved more freely, and slowly began to carry herself with quiet confidence. Winter arrived early, blanketing the plains in frost and snow. Kellen visited often, bringing firewood, supplies, and steady companionship. And Maggie greeted him eagerly each time, her laughter filling the small room with warmth. One evening in December, as snow fell softly outside, Elise and Kellen sat together at her table sharing coffee. The fire crackled gently, casting a warm glow across the room. Can I ask you something? Elise said, her fingers wrapped around her cup. Anything, he replied. Why haven't you married? Kellen paused, considering his answer. I never found a reason strong enough to try, until now. His eyes met hers, steady and certain. The air between them shifted, heavy with unspoken emotion. I'm not what most men want, Elise whispered. My body isn't. Stop, he said gently. Don't tell me what other men want. Tell me what you want. She looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know if I'm allowed to want anything anymore. You are, he said softly, because I see you, Elise. Not the woman you think you have to be, but the woman you truly are. Tears shimmered in her eyes. What if she isn't worth knowing? Kellen reached across the table and took her hand. Then I'll be the only fool in Montana who believes she is. Elise laughed softly through her tears, turning her hand to intertwine their fingers. They sat together in the quiet glow of the fire, two wounded hearts finding strength in one another. For the first time since her husband had left, Elise felt hope stirring within her. And though neither of them spoke the words aloud, both knew something powerful had begun, something neither of them had expected, yet neither wished to resist. Winter tightened its grip on Red Cedar Junction, covering the plains in a blanket of snow and silence. Inside her small rented room, Elise Carroll wrapped the soft cloth around her waist each morning, the gentle support reminding her how far she had come. The corset that once confined her now lay forgotten in a wooden drawer. For the first time in years, she could breathe freely, not just in body, but in spirit. Kellen Robles became a steady presence in her life. He visited often, sometimes bringing firewood, sometimes fresh vegetables from the ranch, and sometimes nothing at all except his quiet companionship. Maggie adored him, greeting him at the door with bright eyes and eager laughter, her small hand slipping easily into his as if it had always belonged there. One evening in early January, snow fell softly outside as Elise poured coffee for them both. But Maggie slept peacefully in the corner, wrapped in a patchwork quilt. The room was warm, filled with the gentle glow of firelight. Kellen, Elise said softly, her voice steady but uncertain. Why do you care so much about me? He looked at her for a moment before answering. Because I know what it feels like to believe you're not enough. She frowned slightly. You? But you're respected, capable. Everyone listens to you. That's what they see, he replied quietly. But inside, I've always wondered if they were just being kind. Elise studied him, her expression softening with understanding. Slowly, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. You're the smartest man I've ever met, she said gently. If you can't see that, then you're the only one who's blind. Her words struck him deeply, if filling a space within him he had never realized was empty. In that moment, both of them understood they were healing each other. As winter gave way to the first hints of spring, their bond grew stronger. They shared quiet walks through town, soft conversations by the fire, and laughter that came more easily with each passing day. Yet both remained careful, respectful of the fragile trust they were building. One afternoon in February, Elise asked Kellen to help her move a heavy trunk from the boarding house storage room. It was filled with quilts her mother had sewn years before, treasures she wished to bring into her own space. The storage room was small and dimly lit, cluttered with old furniture and crates. Together, they lifted the trunk and carefully maneuvered through the narrow space. Halfway to the door, Elise stumbled over an overturned stool. The trunk shifted, and Kellen quickly steadied it, their bodies pressed close together against the wall. For a moment, neither of them moved. Elise, Kellen whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, she breathed, her heart pounding. I want to kiss you. Her breath caught, and she met his gaze without hesitation. Then why don't you? He hesitated. Because once I start, I may not be able to stop. A soft smile touched her lips. Maybe I don't want you to stop. Slowly he set the trunk down, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for her. When their lips met, it was a kiss filled with longing and tenderness, years of loneliness dissolving in a single, powerful moment. Elise clung to him, her hands gripping his shirt as warmth spread through her chest. When they finally parted, they both were breathless, their foreheads resting together. Elise, he said softly, I don't just want you. I choose you. Every part of you. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were not born of sorrow. No one has ever said that to me before. Then they were fools, he replied gently. From that day forward, everything changed. Their affection grew openly, yet with quiet dignity. Weeks later, Kellen arrived with news that would shape their future. I've been offered a promotion at the Conley Ranch, he said, sitting across from her at the small table. Assistant foreman. There's a house on the property. It's modest, but it's warm and sturdy. Elise's hands trembled slightly. Why are you telling me this? Because I'd like you and Maggie to live there with me, he said, his voice steady. Well, as my wife and daughter. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she searched his face. What if I disappoint you? You won't, he said firmly. I've seen you at your strongest and your most vulnerable. I choose you, Elise, exactly as you are. Her heart swelled with emotion. For the first time in her life, she felt truly wanted, not for perfection, but for who she was. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. Yes, Kellen, I'll marry you. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her from the floor as he laughed with happiness. Maggie clapped her hands and laughed beside them, unaware of the depth of the moment, but filled with delight nonetheless. They were married in March in a small ceremony at the Red Cedar Junction Church. The gathering was simple, but heartfelt. Elise wore a pale blue dress sewn by her friend Tiana. while Maggie stood proudly at her side holding a bouquet of wildflowers. When Kellen spoke his vows, his voice was clear and unwavering. Elise met his gaze with equal certainty as she promised to share her life with him. Their new home on the Conley property was modest, but filled with warmth. Together, they built a life rooted in respect, kindness, and quiet devotion. Maggie thrived under Kellen's gentle guidance, and Elise's laughter returned, brighter and freer than it had ever been before. Years passed, bringing children, seasons of hardship, and countless moments of joy. Kellen's confidence grew, and Elise's strength deepened. They faced every challenge side by side, their love steady and enduring. One evening, many years later, as the sun dipped low over the Montana plains, they sat together on the porch of their home. Yet their children were grown, their lives full and rich with memories. "Do you ever think about that day?" Elise asked softly, resting her head on his shoulder. "The day I opened the wrong door?" Kellen smiled gently. "Every day. Do you regret it?" "Not for a second," he said. "It was the best mistake I ever made." Elise looked out across the golden horizon, her heart filled with gratitude. What had once been a moment of embarrassment had become the beginning of a life filled with love, healing, and hope. She took his hand, intertwining their fingers as the evening breeze whispered across the plains. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the wrong door opens at exactly the right time." Kellen kissed her forehead, his voice warm and certain. "And sometimes it leads you home." Together, they watched the sun disappear beyond the horizon, where two souls who had found each other by chance and chosen each other for a lifetime.